Welcome to Approaches to Listening. I'm William Taylor, the host and author. Episode 3, How We Listen to Music Matters. Have you ever thought, I wish I could listen better? It's not really a common thought. Interestingly enough, when you're not getting what you want from the music you listen to, or you're not getting what you want from a conversation you hear, I found a tendency to fault either the music or speaker instead of your own skills as a listener. Music is the perfect art to teach listening because it combines two elements perfectly into one: sound and time. To be a proficient listener, you need to learn to be in time, or be in the moment. And it's worth asking, if you're not in the moment, are you really where you want to be? And of course, the other element is sound. It's remarkable to consider how much sound can affect us, whether we're hearing a police siren, sizzling bacon, or a tune that makes us want to move and dance. Sounds can spark connection and understanding, something great orators, playwrights, and musicians know very well. So if you want to learn to listen, music is the most ideal art to study. In last week's episode, I shared one of my most transformative experiences as a musician, the moment where I learned how much I love to listen to music. Unfortunately, that led me to my first calling. Remember, I was a teenager at this time, and I found my calling as a musical crusader. It became a really dangerous thing to listen to any type of popular music in front of me. It also became risky for my younger siblings to practice music in front of me, as I felt it my duty to show them where they weren't as expressive and musical as they could be. I had a goal to convince everyone that they would have lesser lives until they listened to music like me. If I remember correctly, I believed that we could achieve something resembling world peace if everyone listened to Beethoven the way I did. I still argue for the intentional type of listening that I crusaded as a teenager, but have significantly tempered my ideas and thoughts. However, during this intense campaign, I began gathering a valuable resource in the form of counter-arguments to my once aggressive ideas, some of which I'm excited to discuss today. In today's episode, I'll first lay out the commonplace practice of passive listening in our culture. Second, I'll tackle listening's importance in connection, whether that's to ideas, art, or people. Third, I'll discuss the vulnerability that we can avoid by becoming competent listeners. Fourth, I'll share some specific counter-arguments to the idea of active listening and explain why I don't think they hold up. Point number 1, commonplace passive listening. Do you know how much time a week you're surrounded by music? I say surrounded by music because I don't think that having music present qualifies as listening to music. A 2024 Forbes report stated that the average American streams just over 20 hours of music a week. Now add music in streamed video games, radio, and music in public locations, and that number does more than creep up. One of the major changes that occurred through technology in the 20th century was the expansion of music's availability. However, we were well into the 20th century when recorded music began to hold a candle to live performance, meaning that the high-quality music that was heard only in close proximity to performing musicians was now available at home, in the car, or wherever. Before the 20th century, it was an entirely different story. No performers, no music. Now in the 21st century, it's atypical for teens and adults to not have constant access to at least YouTube or Spotify. And frequently, preteens and children have access to YouTube Kids and other forms of on-demand music. Everyone's surrounded by music. And subsequently, everyone has experience with passive listening, which merits a definition. Here's a definition of passive, as provided by the Oxford Dictionary. Accepting or allowing what happens, or what others do, without active response or resistance. To add to that, Wikipedia defines listening in the following words: listening is giving attention to a sound. When you combine those two definitions, passive listening occurs when we accept that we are not actively responding to the sound that we say we're giving attention to. And this is perhaps the most common form of listening to music in North America today. We have the privilege of being surrounded by an abundance of both musical genres and artists, and we can choose to engage with whatever music we want. And that's a privilege the average listener is clearly taking advantage of. But with that privilege comes a challenge that stems from our modern lack of restrictions. Mortimer Adler captured this dilemma when he wrote How to Read a Book, where he argues that deep, active reading leads to understanding, and is a goal that we should pursue as readers. Originally written in 1940, the book was updated and re-released in 1972, and one of the major changes that spurred the book's update was the rising presence of radio and television and their effect on active reading. If Mortimer Adler detected challenges to the skills of reading and gaining understanding due to technology in 1972, I'm sure he'd have even more to say about internet and phone usage today. Adler's work focuses on how to improve our reading, but right at the beginning of the book he makes an illuminating point about reading just for fun, and I've added listening to Mortimer's words. Reading or listening for entertainment is the least demanding kind of reading or listening. Furthermore, there are no rules for it. This is the challenge that accompanies listening today. There are no rules. It's easy to identify rules or limitations that applied to music in the past, but these are now rules and limitations that we found convenient solutions to. Here are some examples. You get tired of the 5 to 7 CDs you owned, and then you had to go to the store, pick a new CD, and pay $10 to $20 for it. Or your MP3 player couldn't hold as many songs as you'd like. My first MP3 player was a 256 megabyte player, by the way. So you constantly have to cycle out what music you'll carry with you. Today we've completely overcome some of these obstacles, and have at least made tremendous progress towards all of them. But the result is that without limitations, without a set of rules, listening to music has a tendency to default to entertainment. Even more than that, it becomes that strange branch of passive listening, where we say we're listening or say we're giving attention to the sound that is our music, but aren't really in the moment with it. If everything is entertainment, then everyone sets the bar for how they want to engage with it. Then music becomes a mirror, or an echo chamber, that can only go as far as you allow or expect yourself to be entertained. If that's all music is to you, then I believe you're limiting what music can offer you. As a side note, I'm not advocating against listening for fun, or seeking just entertainment from your music. The subject of this podcast is expanding your approaches to listening to get more of what you want and love from music. And that means moving beyond just entertainment and listening. I also want to make it clear that I frequently listen to music passively. But there's far more to music than can be heard by only a passive approach to listening. That's why I believe music should be more than just entertainment. Academic musicians usually have moved beyond this entertainment-centric conception of music. Music is our schooling, our job, our vocation, our future, and our gateway to the moment. So passive listening can't be all we know. Now, the university teaches models that help musicians surpass this rule-less approach to music. And they do so by imposing lots of rules on musicians. And these rules are important. They help you engage with music beyond your understanding, or they help you expand your understanding, using Adler's words. These rules are frustrating at times, but they do at least two things quite well. First, they funnel you towards areas you haven't explored so you can expand what you know. Secondly, they give you something to push against. They give you a starting point that anchors you, but shouldn't ultimately bind you. It's a very good idea to start with the rule, not the exception. And today most listeners who are living in an exceptional age of music availability, don't know the rules, and as such resort to conceiving music as mere entertainment. Is that a problem? I believe it is, especially when we start delving into point number 2. Point number 2 focuses on the importance of listening in connection. How often in movies, TV, books, or dramatic productions of any kind do we hear a variation of the phrase, "listen to me," or "you don't understand"? A favorite example of mine is in La Boheme, when Mimi starts opening up to Rodolfo, and as she does so, she asks, "Do you understand me?" Or, in an English translation, "Are you listening?" And because he did understand, because he was listening, he gets to hear one of the most exquisite moments in operatic history. Ernest Hemingway said, "When people talk, listen completely." Then he adds this criticism that I believe is accurate. Most people never listen. A quick look at Disney's Beauty and the Beast gives a great example in Gaston of someone who has complete conversations with others, but doesn't truly listen to what the other says. When Belle and Gaston first interact, Gaston ignores or doesn't pick up on anything that Belle says. He just responds in a way that steers the conversation where he wants. He responds, but never really listens. This conversation lasts a full minute, and because he doesn't listen, he doesn't hear what Belle says or means. But let's take a look at a positive example from the same movie. Toward the end of the film, the Beast gives Belle permission to leave his castle, but before Belle leaves, they have a real conversation. The proof that they really reached an understanding appears as a conversation ends. Here, Belle says, "Thank you for understanding." Listening and understanding are close companions, and neither are served well by passive engagement. It's because of the close relationship between listening, connection, and understanding that I feel strongly enough to tell anyone, in any circumstance, how we listen to music matters. It's comfortable to think that you just passively connect with music, and then when you connect with people, you do so much more intentionally. But it's worth some self-reflection to ponder how you do connect with both music and people. How often do you talk to someone who has headphones on or earbuds in? The worst for me is when you can hear their music, but they're talking to you as if that's a perfectly normal way to converse. What's even harder to swallow for me than conversing that way is the idea that it's acceptable to have full conversations without really listening. What do you call talking without really conversing? Or to quote a popular song, hearing without listening. Simon and Garfunkel call it the sound of silence. And if you're not convinced that this is a problem, go listen to The Sound of Silence, as I'm sure Simon and Garfunkel can convince you better than I can. Although in the case of this podcast, I would rearrange those lyrics and call it listening without hearing. I think everyone will agree that human connection is of paramount importance, but our listening doesn't reflect that. That's where art comes in. In many ways, whether you're making music or consuming it, you're setting a precedent as a listener. So if you primarily employ passive listening, then you're likely to employ that practice in other areas of your life as well. This doesn't mean that there's no place for passive listening. But if passive listening is the only listening you do, then you really have an unanchored listening experience. An experience that could be much deeper with some practice and education. Real, active listening is so crucial because it takes you beyond knowledge. It will expand your understanding. It's important to note that knowledge can be gained passively, but understanding cannot. Our third point details the vulnerability that comes if you don't have an intentional approach to music consumption. This vulnerability is amplified by several hidden or not so hidden elements in our musical experiences, one of the most commonplace being notifications and ads. There are so many platforms that have free viewing options, like YouTube or Spotify, and it's easy to say that your musical experiences are fine with ads. That is, until they're not. What if you swap some words around? Instead of saying, my musical experiences aren't hampered by ads, try saying, my listening experiences aren't hampered by ads. Just imagine having a stimulating conversation and a 15-second interruption strikes right at a sensitive moment. I've had that happen far too many times for my liking. It can shatter musical experience in a heartbeat. I don't know anyone who enjoys ads, but we do tend to enjoy phone notifications, especially when we have so much control over which notifications are pushed. Once we compare listening to music and human conversation, it's clear that notifications are a huge obstacle. Whether it's a news update, financial updates, video releases, or just your daily texts and messages, these notifications almost always cause us to immediately check them. Today, active listening means actively disconnecting with other things. It's worth asking again, is listening worth all that trouble? I believe it is. The problem is that because active listening isn't taught, it's hard to see all the benefits that it offers, as these are benefits that come after the cost of listening is paid. This leads to a question I've wrestled with for a long time about free listening options. Does free music promote better or worse listening patterns? Does paying for our music promote discernibly improved listening? The best music I've found, in any genre or style, rewards investment. And one of the simplest ways to invest in what we're hearing is to pay for it. And the demanded form of investment seems to be time and energy. It's worth noting that paying cash seems to be an extremely effective method of helping us commit our time and energy. Now, I'm not saying that paying money is essential to having an immersive musical experience, but I do believe it's one of the simplest, not most convenient ways of setting aside brain space and time for a deep connection with music. We have large obstacles to listening in ads and notifications, but there's another large obstacle when you utilize platforms like Spotify and YouTube, namely their algorithm. The function of these algorithms is outside of our control, and they both determine and enforce the analytical and critical filters for us, ushering us to explore and experience what they want us to explore and experience. We can't change how they enforce their system of analysis and how the critique they employ shapes what they promote. We have some control when we intentionally choose what we subscribe to and watch, but their algorithm still represents the platform's agenda and will attempt to guide how we use our time. The need for active listening and proper use of the critical filter have never been more important than they are today, especially when corporations get to determine a large part of what is recommended to us. Active listening tends to fail when you start reacting to notifications, ads, or recommendations. Point number 4. Let's discuss some specific counter-arguments to active listening. Argument number 1. It's just music. Does it matter whether I listen actively or passively? When you consider the 20 hours of streamed music a week, and mix that with the haunting message of Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence, and compound those with the obstacles of ads, notifications, and algorithms, then I would say, yes, it does matter how you listen to music. Argument number 2. All music is subjective, so I'll just keep listening to the music that makes me feel what I like. The problem I have with this argument is that it ignores your subjectivity, especially in regard to your approach and attitude towards listening. How you listen determines what you hear, and how you hear determines what you feel and think. Here we have the echo chamber problem again, where contentment with your current knowledge or experience can prevent you from hearing or comprehending anything beyond it. This means that you can actively listen to a piece and still totally miss what the piece offers because of your approach or attitude. I remember attending a piano studio class right after I began studies at a new university, and I was unsure where I fit in, skill-wise, with my peer pianists. So in that performance, I turned on my critical filter and cranked it up to max. That was my fear-driven reaction of not measuring up. And I absolutely did not enjoy that performance. What did I see and hear? Everything that was wrong, because that's what I was looking and listening for. If you find yourself not getting what you think you could out of music, perhaps you're utilizing the wrong filter. Perhaps you're attempting to actively listen, but you have 50 different to-dos to take care of. And then you listen, have a crummy experience driven by those 50 to-dos, and label the piece as crummy or mediocre. If you don't factor in your ability to listen, then you are likely to make the mistake of believing that something intricate and well-crafted is less than it is. It's remarkably easy to alter your approach or attitude, subjective things that are at least partially in your control. If you want to try this, then skip the most important meal of your day, and then measure your mood and functionability. Skip 2 meals. Cut your sleep in half. Have a drink. And then try to engage with music and see what the experience is like. It's that easy to alter how we engage and connect with everything. That's why having a varied and intentional approach to listening is so important. It gives you tools that place you in control of your experiences with music, instead of letting circumstance dictate how you listen. Argument number 3. I think you're overthinking the whole thing. My defense to this point would be the approach I laid out in episode 2, an approach that advocates a balance between thinking and feeling. Maybe I'm overcomplicating things, but I don't think so, because these arguments draw on 4 filters of listening. Filters that balance thinking and feeling so that neither one dominates a relationship with music. I also believe that my arguments flesh out dilemmas that are commonly experienced by academic musicians, but haven't been given a specific vocabulary. I might be bringing more to the table than is usually discussed, but if these are recurring realities for academic musicians, then I believe it's better to have them exposed so they can be engaged with in an intentional way. Counter-argument 4. I already enjoy my music so much. I'm afraid that if I start investing a lot into music, it might upset the nice balance I already have. To paraphrase a quote from the movie Finian's Rainbow, there's a tranquility in the status quo. Joni Mitchell penned the lyrics, "Don't it always seem to go, you don't know what you got till it's gone." I think that's generally true. I also think that an effective antidote to that problem is to keep adding to what you have. And ultimately, this podcast is about helping listeners with that process as they interact with their music. I'll close with this thought. We all tend to judge musicians by their ability to perform. But when studying the art that revolves most around sound, it might be an interesting idea to evaluate musicians by how good they are at listening. Regardless of your position as a performing musician or just a listener, I firmly believe how we listen to music matters. Thank you for listening. Please join me for episode 4 in 2 weeks. If you'd like to support me or see more of my work, please visit my Patreon page or submit your email to my newsletter. The links will be in the show notes.